Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of yctv.org. In this program, we seek to integrate the biblical history with secular history and see where they overlap, where they influence one another. In this part of history we know as ancient times, looking at the different civilizations that occurred throughout ancient history. And last episode, we saw the Persians invaded Babylon and defeated the Babylonians, establishing their own empire then under Cyrus the Great. So we're looking now at Persia. We had just gotten to the point where Cyrus, the emperor of the Persian Empire, who conquered Babylon, was allowing the Jewish exiles to go back home. He did this for any of the groups that he conquered. He was a very benevolent emperor in that regard. He believed in human rights. In fact, there's a picture, or there's an actual a plaque in the United Nations of his Declaration of Human Rights, which is very progressive for his time, certainly. But the Jewish people had been in exile for 70 years. And it had been predicted by God even before they went into exile that a man named Cyrus would be the one who would allow them to come home. By that time, most of the Jews had no personal knowledge of their native country. They only knew what they had been told by their elders. So for some, it was a hard sell to go back. For others, they greatly anticipated it because of what they had heard and their ties to the land through their faith. And Cyrus not only encouraged them to return to their homeland, but gave them back all the temple gold and silver vessels. And in addition, he financed the return or the rebuilding of the walls in the temple. Let me read to you the letter from Cyrus to the Jews that's recorded by the Jewish historian Josephus. He says, I have given leave to as many of the Jews that dwell in my country as please to return to their own country and to rebuild their city and to build the temple of God at Jerusalem on the same place where it was before. I have also sent my treasurer Mithridates and Zerubbabel, the governor of the Jews, that they may lay the foundations of the temple and may build it 60 cubits high and of the same latitude, making 3 edifices of polished stones and one of the wood of the country, and the same order extends to the altar whereupon they offer sacrifices to God. Such great detail that Cyrus is going into in order to make it easy for the Jewish people to return home. I require also that the expenses for these things may be given out of my revenues. Moreover, I have also sent the vessels which King Nebuchadnezzar pillaged out of the temple, and have given them to Mithridates the treasurer, and to Zerubbabel the governor of the Jews, that they may have them carried to Jerusalem, and may restore them to the temple of God. Now, then he goes into the numbers of the different items, and I think we'll kind of skip over that a little bit. the last statement he makes then after listing all the substances, what happened here? He says, I permit them to have the same honor which they were used to have from their forefathers, as also for their small cattle and for wine and oil, 205,500 drachmae, and for wheat flour, 20,500 artabae, and I give order that these expenses shall be given them out of the tributes due from Samaria. Now, if you read the book of Nehemiah, you'll see that causes some problems. The priests shall also offer these sacrifices according to the laws of Moses in Jerusalem. And when they offer them, they shall pray to God for the preservation of the king and his family, that the kingdom of Persia may continue. So he wants them, when they reestablish worship in a rebuilt temple, and they're offering sacrifices, to pray for him and his family. But my will is that those who disobey these injunctions and make them void shall be hung upon a cross, and their substance brought into the king's treasury. Well, isn't that amazing what King Cyrus does for the Jewish people to encourage them to return to Jerusalem? Now, one thing that you may notice was not mentioned if you looked at the list of utensils, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. We've said before that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't mentioned in what was brought to Babylon. It's not mentioned going back. And no one in the record asked why. No one said, hey, wait a minute, where's the Ark of the Covenant? Perhaps this indicates that everyone knew where it was. Now, there's disagreement as to where that might have been, but there's some indication that it may have been taken to the Elephantine Temple at Aswan in Egypt, which we looked at before. Maybe not. Who knows? Well, one of the interesting, at the same time confusing persons mentioned in the book of Daniel is Darius the Mede. Many have misunderstood him to be the successor of Cyrus because of the great authority that he held. But in fact, he was a subordinate king of Babylon under Cyrus. Cyrus was the emperor over all of the empire, and he appointed kings over different areas, and Darius the Mede was the king of Babylon. During the first year of the reign of Darius the Mede, Daniel came to understand that the prophesied 70 years of captivity was almost at an end. You see that in Daniel 9, 1 and 2. In response to Daniel's fervent prayer for Yahweh to act upon his promise, he was given a promise that Yahweh would do something even greater at the end of 77s. So not only is God going to do something at the end of the 70 years, but he gave Daniel 77s in which something even greater would happen. And we looked at the understanding of that last time. At this moment, Yahweh, at that moment, 77s ahead, Yahweh would send the Anointed One who would die for his people and thereby put an end to the ages-long opposition to the purposes of God. That's in Daniel 9, 24 to 27. Also at this time, Daniel was given a prophecy, which is in Daniel 11, concerning almost 400 years of the future. Now, we're going to look at that in detail later on in an episode when we are actually at the time period when those prophecies would take place. And then we'll look at Daniel 11, verse by verse, and see beside it what actually happened to fulfill each of those prophecies. But that's for a later time. Daniel is told that 4 Persian kings would rule after Cyrus, with the 4th being the richest of all. And here are those 4 kings. The names weren't given to Daniel, but we know who they are from history. The 4th of them was Xerxes, following Cambyses, Smerdis, Darius, Hystaspes, another Darius, not to be confused with the one that we are looking at with Daniel now. Xerxes was very wealthy. If you look at Esther chapter 1, 1 through 12, you see an indication of his wealth. So Persia became the dominating force from Babylon all the way over to Egypt from 537 to 331 BC. You can see the vast coverage of territory that the Persians controlled, all the way over to India. You see the Indus River there, the Indus Valley on the right, and you have Bactria, Parthia, on up to the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus Mountains, surrounding much of the Black Sea, over into the Balkans, covering an area into Europe of Macedonia, and then, of course, the area that we call Turkey today, Asia Minor, and then down through the Levant, where Israel, the other nations around were located, and into Egypt. So the Persians covered a great deal of territory. During the reign of Persia, there were actually 3 returns of the Jewish people. There had been 3 deportations into exile under Nebuchadnezzar II. And so under the Persians, initially under Cyrus, there would also be 3 returns, which you see there in order: under Zerubbabel, 536, under Ezra in 458, and under Nehemiah in 455. The first return in 536 or possibly 537 was under Zerubbabel. We find that explained to us in Ezra 1 through 6. The leaders of this first return seemingly were unable to recruit a majority of the Jews to accompany them back to Judah. And so there will be 3 returns altogether, and even at that, all the Jewish people did not return. There still will be a large number left in Persia. At that time, they began to work on building an altar and initiating sacrifice in the 7th month. That would be our September, October. The following year, they began to lay the foundation for the temple and would work on that for some time. Economic and political struggle ensued for those that were working on these things and building, as in part of that was opposition through letters that were written by opponents to the then emperor Cambyses. And under Cambyses, the work stopped. In Ezra 3, we see joy at the building of the temple and tears as well, because as the temple resumed building and as it came to a completion, the people who remembered the old temple were crying because it was disappointing to them to see how small it was compared to the old temple. Those who had not seen it were rejoicing with tears because they finally had a temple again. Ironically, though Judah remained, so before I just do that, look at what Ezra here. Ezra opened the book, he opened the law. All the people could see him because he was standing above them, and as he opened it, the people all stood up. Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, Yahweh. And all the people lifted their hands and responded, Amen, Amen, which means so be it. Then they bowed down and worshiped Yahweh with their faces to the ground. So this took about 6 hours for Ezra to read the entire law to the people. And we're told in Nehemiah that there were interpreters scattered around to either translate from Hebrew into their common language, or possibly even explain to the people, do expositional teaching. But the people stood there the whole time, and at the end, they were moved to tears as well with the reading of the law. One Bible scholar has said this: ironically, though Judah remained the geographical locus of the covenant race, Babylon became its historical and intellectual home. And this was not true not only in the years of the exile per se, but for centuries to come. In fact, in the first several centuries of the Christian era, Babylon was the center of a thriving religious community that had generated its own Jewish tradition separate from Jerusalem and Alexandria in Egypt. There, devout scribes and scholars created a Babylonian Talmud, and a Babylonian Masoretic school produced its own families of biblical texts and manuscripts. So the Babylonian Judaism was developing sometimes differently than the Judaism that we found in restored Judah or in Jerusalem. I wanted to tell you something else that was happening at the same time, and that's the era of Pythagoras. Do you remember Pythagoras? The Pythagorean theorem that we learned about in geometry? Well, this is when he lived. He lived in southern Italy. He was considered the first true mathematician, the first to teach that the earth was a sphere that revolves around the sun, and proved the Pythagoras theorem, which of course was named after him. Well, coming back to Persia, Cyrus the Great had died. This figure that had been prophesied by Isaiah 150 years before his birth, who would bring liberation to the Jewish captives. And according to the first century BC Greek historian Strabo, Alexander the Great visited the tomb of Cyrus before he died. The tomb inscription reads, "O man, I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians and was king of Asia. Grudge me not, therefore, this monument." Don't anybody think badly about him for having this big monument, because he deserves it, in his own words. All right, so he's followed by Cambyses II, whom we mentioned a little bit earlier, who was the son of Cyrus when his father was indeed killed in battle. Now, he acted oppositely from the way of his father. He was not the kind-hearted man that Cyrus had been, killing his own sister, who was also his wife, Roxana, and he also killed his son, Praxaspis, using an arrow. He buried 12 noble Persians alive and condemned Croesus to death. Remember Croesus, the king that had been saved by Cyrus? Well, he condemned him to death. But then he relented, rejoicing that the sentence had not been carried out. Changed his mind. However, he punished the officers who had delayed the execution for not following orders. Well, at this time is when letters were written by opponents of the building of the wall and the temple in Jerusalem to Cambyses, and it caused the work on the temple to cease. In 525, Cambyses defeated Egypt, whereupon he publicly ridiculed the Egyptian religion, plunging his dagger into a bull which was revered by the Egyptians as the god Apis. He exhumed mummies, he pried into royal tombs, profaned temples, and ordered their idols to be burned. He even used cats against the Egyptians. Being struck with an epidemic, the Egyptians were convinced that their religion was correct, because Cambyses and his men had these seizures. They thought that their gods had punished him. And so Cambyses, in claiming victory over them in battle, threw cats at them because they revered cats. He used camels to defeat Libya, which you see on the left side of the map, west of Egypt, but he failed to take Carthage, which would be to the extreme left, not on our map. If you follow the Mediterranean coast of northern Africa, you would get to Carthage on the opposite side of the Mediterranean, across from Italy. But at this time, while he was off conquering these areas, a usurper seized the throne called Smerdis. He also went by the name Galamata. He claimed to be Cambyses' dead brother, Bardia. You see him pictured there in the family tree, Bardia. Now, people believe that this really was Bardia, but Cambyses wasn't so sure because he had secretly murdered his brother, Bardia. So, he's on his way home. Sometime in this period is when he caused the work on the temple to cease. So he's on his way home and apparently lost his sanity and committed suicide. That led to civil war back in Persia or Babylon. At this time, Darius Hystaspes came into play. He was a distant relative, a cousin of Cyrus through his father, Hystaspes, and he actually saved the empire by assassinating the impostor and restoring law and order. After subduing rebellious Babylon after a long siege, he crucified 3,000 of its leading citizens. But here are the things that he did that were of benefit. First, he ordered work to continue on the temple in 520 BC. You find that in Ezra 4 and 6. He enlarged the borders of the Persian Empire from India to West Africa and from Arabia to southern Russia. He built roads, carried out sweeping legal and judicial reforms. He instituted coinage and postage systems. He built the city of Persepolis, which is located on the map where you see it, and which is pictured here. He was a follower of Zoroaster, which believed in the two spirits from Ahura Mazda, which were truth and falsehood, a form of dualism. And he declared war upon the old cults and the polytheistic Magian priesthood and made Zoroastrianism the religion of the state. This is the same time as the prophet Haggai and Zechariah. Work on the temple resumed under his rule, as you know. In 515, the temple was completed. Those who remembered Solomon's temple wept very loudly because it seemed like a shack in comparison. We see that in Ezra 3. This second temple had an Aaronic priest, but no ark. No winged angels that protected the ark, nor the Urim and Thummim. Now, at this same time in Rome, the census was taken, and there were 130,909 people living in Rome. That was in 507. In 492, Darius the Great attempted to conquer Athens to punish it for aiding a revolt by Greek city-states along the coast of Asia Minor, and it was called the Ionian Revolt. And so he attempted to conquer Greece. The first campaign in 492 was led by Mardonius, his nephew slash son-in-law slash brother-in-law, who resubjugated the area of Thrace and forced Macedonia to become a fully subordinate client kingdom, part of Persia. However, as you can see on the map here, the arrow that's going from Akthanos down in the Thracian Sea, around that island there, as they were progressing along that route, Mardonius's fleet was wrecked in a storm off the coast of Mount Athos, where the Persians lost 300 ships and 20,000 men. Greek historian Herodotus reported, since the coasts of Athos abound in wild beasts, some men were carried off by beasts and so perished. Others were dashed against the rocks. Those who could not swim perished because of that, and still others by the cold. Well, this would affect the next invasion by Darius, who would then send his fleet along the southern islands instead of the northern coast. Meanwhile, Mardonius, who was with the land force, not on the ships, was wounded in a night battle. Returning to Asia, the campaign was a partial disaster, having failed at punishing Athens and Eretria for helping the Ionians in their rebellion. But they did reestablish control over Macedonia and Thrace. The next year, having demonstrated his intentions, Darius sent ambassadors to all parts of Greece, demanding their submission. He received it from almost all of them, except Athens and Sparta, both of whom executed the ambassadors. With Athens still defiant and Sparta now effectively at war with him, Darius ordered a further military campaign for the following year, gathering hundreds of thousands of troops from across the empire. Darius the Great crossed the Aegean Sea to invade Europe with a huge fleet of 600 ships, carrying some 10,000 Persian crack cavalry and 300,000, some say 200,000, some say 600,000, somewhere in between, foot soldiers to capture Athens and subdue the Greek civilization. But his army was soundly defeated by the Greeks, who outnumbered them 2-1, who were outnumbered 2-1 on a small plain called Marathon by the brilliant Greek general Miltiades. On the base there you see a picture of a Greek soldier fighting against a Persian. The Battle of Marathon took place where you see it on the map there. Here's how it looked as the Persians landed and came to battle the predominantly Athenians on that plain at the Bay of Marathon. Here's a drawing of them landing. Here's a drawing of the heroes of the Battle of Marathon, as is this. And so the Greeks turned back the Persian invasion. Athens got word because a runner was sent to Athens from Marathon to the city to tell them of their victory. Whereupon, having delivered the message, he dropped dead. And it's from that, in order to honor that runner, that the race called a marathon was established. Here's a breakdown of the number of soldiers that were killed, enslaved on both sides. You can see that the Athenians fared much better. And we'll talk about what happened next on Discovering His Story next time.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.